Hello everyone, welcome to this EPG Pathshala. This lecture is on culture, resistance and communication. This lecture is a part of your paper Media, Culture and Society. In this lecture, we will discuss the aspects of cultural resistance. This lecture will explain cultural resistance and communication through two case studies of folklores. The first folklore is from Maharashtra, popular among the Vadar communities. The second is a folklore from Bihar about Reshma Chuharmal and the violence that took place around this folklore. Both the case studies are discussed in the second part of the module. In the first part, we will discuss the notion of counterculture and oral traditions of folklore. Learning outcome. Through this lecture, you will learn the significance of counterculture. You will come to know that counterculture may emerge in any field of inquiry. This way, you will be able to see even a small incidence of questioning the norms, values and practices of dominant culture that may play an important role in the cultural resistance and development of counterculture. You will also be able to question the stereotypes that are formed about countercultural practices. Counterculture and folklore. Culture is communicational as defined by James Carey. Thus, culture is not a static category but a dynamic one. In this rifts, dissent, negotiations, appropriation, resistance all go together to shape and reshape the culture. And in this process, countercultures emerge, negotiating and challenging the cultural dominance. Many a times, the countercultural practices do not invite incorporations and negotiations, but violence. Cultural confrontation and violence that takes place for dominance and resistance should not be seen as born by cultural differences. It is carried by a will to social discrimination by particular social agents. This is clearly exemplified in the case of Reshma Chuharmal folklore that we will discuss in the second part of the lecture. When we use the term folklore, we are not using it in a hierarchical sense, where folk is the little tradition and classical culture is the greater tradition. As we have already discussed in our other lectures, that popular culture and highbrow culture are not two separate fixed terrains. They both interact and negotiate with each other. A.K. Ramanujan argues that these two comments on each other cannot be understood independently of each other. For Ramanujan, folklore is neither a precious preserve that needs to be museumized, nor is it a culture of little people. Folklore is a full-fledged collaborator in the production of cultural meaning. Folklores are autotelic, which means that they travel themselves without actual movements of the whole population. Every time it is told and retold, it crosses all kinds of boundaries. Hence, each retelling modifies its content and spirit. Folklores as memories harness both dominance and defiance. Memory can be equally subjected to attempts of domination and rebellion. The relationship between power and memory is not univocal at all. Ambivalence and ambiguity are deeply embedded in the agendas. Establishment and mainstream anxiously use people's memories for their ends, possibly prompted by a wish to nip in the bud the resistance potential of people's memories, perceived as a frightening force. But people may as well harness their collective symbolic heritage against attempts of control and hegemony. These oral traditions of folklores are the sites of construction of identity for communities. The other point of caution is that the countercultures should not be equated with alternative culture. Some cultural practices may play the role of counterculture at certain period of time in a given cultural milieu, but it should not necessarily be constructed as an alternative culture. Counterculture may emerge in any field of music, literature, narrative, performing arts, community festivals, etc. The counterculture may also at times contain elements of dominance, but at the same time, the interventionist tendencies of counterculture cannot be denied. In this regard, Vibodh Parthasarathi, in his essay Interventionist Tendencies in Popular Culture, argues that particular instances of opposition to the material, political, or symbolic basis of dominant communication is more than a mere assertive performance. He writes, the entry of underclass into the processes of communication signifies not merely a change in social agents. More importantly, it transforms their status from being consumers of mass culture to the producers of counterculture, from being the source of information to proactive subjects of images and text. So, the folklores that we are going to discuss are assertions of people whereby they resist the dominant mode of cultural significations, hence face violence many a times. Similarly, statues of the icons of marginalized sections challenge the aesthetic of the dominant culture at various levels. Along with that, it signifies a resistance to the dominant culture in which icons of marginalized are either absent or present in distorted and stereotyped forms. Let us take up all these arguments to the case studies. Case study number 1. Folklores of the Vadar communities of Maharashtra. The Vadars are the stone workers. Their occupation involves digging out, breaking, cutting and carving stones. Their caste has the inferior status of Shudravarna. The Vadars form one of the 12 castes of a collective termed Gota. The Marathi term Gota usually applies a collectivity of caste, relation and relatives. Vadar's Gota identify itself as a group of the donkey or the family of the donkey called Gadav Gota. There are various folklores around donkey amongst Vadars. Here, we would like to recommend you to read Poitwain's essay, The Donkey, a mirror of self-identification for further information. These 12 castes are Beldar, Khesadi, Ghongdiwale Vadar, Kaikadi, Kanjarbhat, Katewadi, Kolhati, Kumbhar Parit, Telangi, Vadar and Vaidu. The reason for their conscious association of this cluster of caste or Jati Samuha with the donkey is that all of them raise and use donkeys not only as means of transport but in their work, therefore as a means of subsistence. Let us discuss one of their folklore. King Sasravad had a daughter. She was so beautiful that there was no need for a lamp or candle in the whole palace. The king was concerned and wondered in whose hands he should give such a beautiful girl in the full bloom of her youth. But the girl said, I shall put the garland around the neck of whoever is the best one in the whole world. The announcement was made in heaven and on earth. People from heaven and earth appeared in the royal hall of audience. The court was full. God Agni stood up first. The king's minister pointed out the shortcomings of Agni. Water can extinguish fire. Then God Vayu stood up. A simple man can swallow the wind god too. Then Meghraj stood up. A simple breeze can push away a cloud. This is how all the gods came forward, but none of them could be declared the best. Eventually, God Ralold, the rock, appeared. Fire, wind, rain, absolutely no one can move a rock. He stays immortal in its place. The The princess then resolved to put the garland around the neck of the god Ralold. At that very moment, from among the people on earth, a Vadar entered the hall of the audience. He said, "The rock is not immortal. Wherever he may stand, a Vadar can remove it from that place." Ultimately, the Vadar was declared the best one, superior to all of the gods. The princess put the garland around the neck of the Vadar and went to live happily in his house. It was decided that among all the beings, the Vadar was the best. The Vadar was granted 7 lives and fallow land on 7 boundaries by Surya, the sun god. Now, when we interpret folklores, we will encounter a lot of ambivalence in the terms of dominance and rejection of the dominance. For instance, in this narrative, the gods who are supposed to be the best are stripped of their divine attributes and are reduced to mere natural elements of fire, wind and cloud. Such folk traditions demolish any attempts to homogenize and hegemonize the socio-cultural realm. So, the cosmological attributes that characterize the gods are completely removed. And this is how the logic for the elimination or disqualification of the 3 gods was built up. Only the 4th god escapes this elimination on the ground that no other earthly element can win over him. But the whole situation is reversed with the entry of not a god but a human being. Interestingly, a human being is able to defeat a god for the simple reason that through his labor he can transform anything on earth. According to Poitevin, this narrative proclaims the absolute excellence of the Vadars. The excellence of the Vadars lies in the superior strength of the human labor force and its culture over nature. For Poitevin, through such folk tales, the Vadars express that they are superior to others or that society needs them. The myths help to understand the system of social relations that weaves the whole social fabric, the status of various communities within the society. This story actually addresses the status of the Vadars as stoneworkers. Their labor, which carries no value on earth, turns into an asset of absolute excellence in the story. So, it is through their occupation the community is collectively claiming a right to ascendancy. So you can see that there is no attempt here to get rid of their status as Vadars, but to claim equality through the strength of their labor that not even gods possess. This is an interesting narrative to see how a community which is pushed to the margins in the caste system resists through folklores the dominance of the caste system and its will to overcome the exploitation of that very system. Poitevin argues that the dynamics of the process operates according to the logic of inversion. For that inversion to happen, first of all, the alleged right of the absolute excellence claimed by the god was falsified and declared unacceptable through a royal court ruling. You can see that there is a reliance on the same feudal authority which breeds on the caste system to democratize the claim for marriage with the princess, which is otherwise prohibited in the Varna system. According to Poitevin, such stories act as a symbolic foundation of the group. They establish communication within the community. Now let us look at one more folk tale from the completely different region to see how memory in the form of such folk narratives is a site of social protest in the present. Case study number 2, the folklore of Reshma Chuharmal. The popular mythical folklore of Reshma Chuharmal has many versions which conflict with one another. The actual story of Reshma and Chuharmal is said to have taken place in the Magadh and Bhojpur regions of Bihar. The story is now a bone of contention, an issue of conflict and violence between the upper caste and the Dalits of that region. But first, let us discuss one of the popular versions of the folklore here. Chuharmal was a handsome and a healthy Dusad youth. Reshma, the daughter of a local landlord, was fascinated with him and would offer him invitation for indulgence. Chuharmal initially tried to avoid her, but then She told him she was the daughter of a high caste landlord, while he belonged to the Dusat caste. Thus, Reshma forced him to establish matrimonial relationship with her, in which she succeeded. This relationship resulted in a clash between Chuharmal and the landlord father of Reshma, leading to the victory of the virtuous hero Chuharmal over the landlord and his army. There are various other versions of this folklore. It is glaringly clear that the manner in which the story is remembered by the Dalits makes it a significant element in constructing their collective identity and also cultural resistance to the dominance of a caste system. Such folk legends assert the counter-cultural practices in many ways. For instance, here the intercaste marriage is pronounced as a victory over the caste proscriptions. Chuharmal is not only a hero in the story but is also their god. Every year in Mukama, a fair is held in his memory in the month of March-April where the folk tale is enacted. So this folklore is still alive in people's memories, and they take all efforts to resist the attempt to violently erase this memory. The memory is alive in their social protests as well. The character of Chuharmal signifies victory of Dalits over the centuries-old overtly violent exploitation by the upper caste. On the contrary, the same story brings shame and insult to the upper caste, and hence they have unsuccessfully used violent means to erase this memory. Narayanan says, the feudal Bhumihar upper caste perceived this memory as an insult to their caste. On the other hand, the lower caste reactivated the same memory as a record of protest against the feudal and elite classes of the region. There have been caste atrocities between 1970 and 1990 on these differing interpretations of the folktale. Yukani Kand illustrates that such memories are a site of constant conflict and massacres. On 19th June 1978, in a village named Ikoni of Aurangabad district of Bihar, an actor who was playing the role of Chuharmal in the folk drama Reshma and Chuharmal was shot dead by the upper caste because Reshma belongs to their caste. This folk narrative challenges the whole cultural paradigm of the feudal system. Kauni Kand exemplifies the dialectic of the cultural dominance and cultural resistance and its linkages with the land relations. It is not a coincidence that the upper caste are the landowners in the Ikoni village and the Dalits are the landless labourers. They work on the lands owned by the upper caste. So, the folk tale illustrates an intersection of caste, class and gender, articulating the protest against feudal hegemony and its oppressive discrimination. Narayan writes, the consciousness of the lower caste creates symbols and myths of protest against the domination of hegemonic classes. Because the subaltern are not able to stand openly against the latter's control, their protest finds its expressions in the creation of mythical characters. This gives the satisfaction of a symbolic resistance. The oppressed then identify themselves with these mythical figures of their creation and convert them too into symbols of protest. Now both the folklores negotiate and resist the cultural domination in different ways. There are innumerable such folklores in the Indian subcontinent. We have taken up these two case studies of folklore to substantiate the theoretical arguments. Along with the folklores, you may testify these arguments through various other forms of communicational culture. Let us now try and summarize what we have discussed so far. We have discussed the instances of countercultural practices through oral traditions of folklore. We have discussed the countercultural practices may not necessarily be providing an alternative to the dominant culture, but still intervene and democratize the dominant culture. Do attempt the questions in the self-evaluation quadrant, and for further reading suggestions, please refer to the third quadrant. Thank you.